So I'm very happy actually that to have the opportunity after. It's a very special moment because, you know, we've been working together with Yann for the last 3 years. I'm creating 2 exhibitions here, and finally we have the opportunity to have him in Hong Kong and in the gallery. Yann is the director of the Zao Wou Ki Foundation, and he is the longest person who have worked with him alongside him at the studio and house, because
Yes.
at the time I remember going to see him and spending the family lunch there, and at the same time always going to see Yann and seeing the works. Even though my sister made an internship at some point
Yes.
with you, so yes, Yann has always been part of Zao Wou Ki. And so it's so interesting for us to have him today, not only because we'll know more about his art, but also we'll know more about the man, right? And personally, I think that Zao Wou Ki can be read or can be seen a little bit as an intimate journal. So I think having more insights onto your perspective would be really amazing. Just a small note to say, Francoise Marquet, the wife of Zao Wou Ki and the president of the foundation, will join us in a little bit. She won't say anything specific, but she will just join us for this special moment. So thank you so much again, and thank you all for being here.
So thank you, Arthur, for the invitation. First, thank you for joining, and please do forgive my very French accent. I hope you will understand everything, but if you have any question during the talk, do not hesitate to interrupt and just ask. Arthur also. So as Arthur told you, I began to work with Zao Wou Ki directly, something like 21 years ago, and I was his assistant, which means that it was not to prepare the paintings and not to interfere in any point inside of the creation of the works, but mainly to deal with his archives and to help him to organize exhibitions, make books, and be the link between the artist and the rest of the world, because he wanted him to mainly create and paint in his studio. So I will just begin with a short and quick presentation of the journey of Zao Wou Ki. I'm sure that for Hong Kong audience there won't be any new things, but just to give you a short presentation on the artist. So Zao Wou Ki was born in Beijing in 1920. Shortly after his birth, the Zhao family moved to Shanghai, where his father was a great banker. He belonged to a very ancient and old family in China. And at the age of 15, Zao Wou Ki decided to go to the Hangzhou Fine Arts School to become an artist. His father and the whole family did not prevent him to be an artist. And Zao Wou Ki received courses by Chinese teachers, but also by foreigners teachers. And at that time, he was more involved and more interested in Western art than in Chinese art. On the first page, you will have one of the most ancient paintings that he left, which has been created in 1935-1936, Still Life with Apples. And on the opposite, you've got some comparison with the work of Paul Cézanne, the French impressionist. And you could see that at the time, even if Zao Wou Ki was 15 years old, he had a glance on what happened in Europe. And for him, he was more involved in modernity in Europe than reusing the old tradition and something that for him was a bit fossilized. He wanted to make something new and something different. That's why he didn't paint with India ink on paper, but he decided to use Western materials as oil and canvas. He also had a glance on the old times in Europe. Here you've got a picture showing the Zhao family in Shanghai, circa 1948, and on the wall you could see a painting hanging, which unfortunately disappeared. And this is a copy by Zao Wou Ki about very well-known Raphael paintings, the Copper Madonna, which is now at the National Gallery in Washington, which means that at that time he had the connection and the books to see ancient paintings by the Renaissance, by Impressionist art, and something that he wanted to find and to work on, just to make something different from the Chinese tradition.
I heard that he was there was the postcards at the time, because of course, how did he see all this Western art? There was what, the postcard magazine, or?
Thanks to one of his uncles who went abroad, he received some postcards showing Impressionist works and works by Matisse, Picasso, and so on. And at the time, the family lived in the Shanghai concession, so he had access to the French library, where I could find some books, illustrated books, but also all the reviews from newspaper, Harper Bazaar, Vogue, and so on, where he could find some page devoted to arts and to something more modern than what he could find at the library of the school. This is why you could find here two works made on paper. One on the left, dated 1945, which is a watercolor on paper, showing that he has seen the fauve creations of the end of 19th century, and that's something he wanted to work on and to add to his own personality. And on the right side, you've got a drawing clearly inspired by Matisse. Of course, Henri Matisse had a deep influence on the Chinese student at that time, but you could see that in 1948, he decided to create some kind of portrait clearly inspired by Matisse.
And you have actually some of the portraits, some of these portraits.
Yes.
Right?
You could see India ink portraits dating from that period upstairs on the first stage. And the Hangzhou School of Art left Hangzhou during the Japanese invasion. They went to Chongqing in the middle of China, and when they came back in 1946, Zao Wou Ki was a teacher, and he decided to quit the school in 1947 because he said he had finished with that kind of work, and he wanted to go to Europe to keep on working and to see in real painting the works and what inspired him. So it took him something like 1 year to obtain the visas to go to Europe, and in April 1948 he arrived in Paris, and the first visit he made was for the Louvre Museum, where he went very often just to see the old creations, but he also went to galleries to see exhibitions of modern and contemporary art, just to improve his painting and just to see what was at the time contemporary art. When he arrived in Paris, of course, he took French lessons, because the only word he knew when arriving in Paris was just Montparnasse, which is a quarter of Paris where painters used to stay. So that's where he settled, because for him, a painter had to be in Montparnasse in Paris. He took also lessons at the Académie de la Grande Chaumière, where he drew a lot of ink drawing, where you could find some essay with nude models. And in fact, in a very short time, the teachers at the Grande Chaumière just told him, you don't have to stay anymore because you know how to draw, so you just have to keep on working, but there is no need to take any more lessons. On the next page, you've got an example of India ink by Rembrandt, that is in the Musée du Louvre, and on the right side, the copy made by Zao Wou Ki, and you could see that it is not only a copy, it is some kind of interpretation and something he made about Rembrandt. I guess you could find a small India ink on the same kind of inspiration, but with a Dutch artist, Nicolas Claes, which means that Wou Ki was not only interested by Impressionists and Cubism and Picasso, Matisse, but also something more wide with the Dutch painting of the 17th century.
Just to say on his arrival to Paris, he arrives with Lan Lan. I remember Francoise often say his friends straight up are artists, and how come his friends somehow are the best artists that will be renowned afterwards, while at the time not famous that much.
That's part of the mystery of the Wou Ki. When he arrived with his first wife Lalan, they settled in Montparnasse, and quite not immediately, but nearly quick, the Wou Ki became very close friend to a lot of artists, writers, and intellectuals in Paris, even without speaking French at the time. And in 1949, for example, he met the Belgian poet Henri Michaud, who was the first to write something on the Wou Ki and to illustrate and to write text on his lithographs. And you've got a picture in 1953 at the Galerie Pierre, which was the gallery of Pierre Loeb, a famous gallerist in Paris. And you could see that here he met Jean-Paul Riopel, Maria Elena Vieira da Silva, Georges Mathieu, and a lot of people who became really close friends. In a way, for him, it was perhaps recreating some kind of family, because due to the revolution in China, he couldn't come back again to mainland China. He was supposed to stay only 2 years in Paris just to improve. But with when Mao took power in China, both Lalan and Wou Ki decided to stay in Paris and to keep on practicing and being artists in Paris.
He met also some American GIs. Do you remember the?
Yes.
That stayed after the war, I guess, right?
Because a lot of the GIs had des bourses. Des bourses.
Had subsidies, like
yes,
subvention, like
by the U.S. government to
scholarship. Right?
Yeah, scholarship to train and to make some researches in France. He was close to Norman Bloom and so other artists, American artists based in Paris at that time. So for him it was very important, because if you have a glance on the people who were his friends, you've got Portuguese, you've got Canadian, you've got American people, you've got some French, of course, Chilean people, and for him it was very important to be in Paris, but Paris at that time was very intellectual and international. You could find a lot of foreigners, and for him it was very important just to not be, he wouldn't have been considered as a Chinese painter in Paris. He wanted to be considered as the other people there, just artists in Paris. Not Portuguese, not a Chinese, not an American, but some people making art in Paris. And for him that was very important. And it was for him some kind of finding a new family and a new environment.
Giacometti also was his...
He has been neighbor to Alberto Giacometti for something like 14 years, and they were very close friends. So it's still a mystery to know and to imagine and to understand how it could have been in connection with the right people at the right place at that moment. He also knew the intellectuals like Jacques Lacan, some people, some writers, a lot of intellectual, and it's some kind of mystery.
Yeah, it's so interesting because you have to re-put yourself in the context. Now we just know these names, or these names were the most famous people, but at the time there were a lot of artists, and a lot of artists that no one knows today, and eventually those friends were the good ones.
Yeah.
And
some of them are still unknown now, but most of them are still very famous now. So he had good choice and good taste. The painting here, called Venice Piazza in 1951, is an example of what he found in Europe when traveling. In 1950, he succeeded to buy a car, and then he could afford to travel, so he went to Italy, to Spain, to other places like that. And for him, it was like having a grand tour and finding something more about European traditions. And when he went to Italy, he was very shocked by the Italian perspective. The fact that in Italy, when you go in every city, at the middle of the city, you've got the church, you've got the palaces, and that's something you could see in that painting, because you've got the church in the middle of the city, and then the perspective with the Renaissance view, and that's something that was very interesting for him, to find something different from the Chinese landscapes and the Chinese perspective. In 1951 also, he discovered, he saw for the first time a white painting by Paul Klee. When he was in China, he already knew Paul Klee because he got a book on Paul Klee when he was in China. But in 1951, he saw his first original works by Paul Klee, and sometimes later it brought him to abstractions, and he decided, as Paul Klee did, to use some kind of signs, some kind of characters, small characters, and to include it into his paintings, just to tell something different. And this is the first time we could see he reused some part of his Chinese tradition, Chinese roots, because he didn't want to, as Paul Klee did, use circles, letters of European origin. He decided to use signs and Chinese signs, mostly ancient Chinese signs coming from early bronzes or oracular bones, but he didn't want to include it with a meaning. You could read some of the characters, but for him it wasn't the important thing. For him it was to use the characters as a pattern, as something that created something new, but not as a readable character. And here you've got one work by Paul Klee that belonged to Zao Wou Ki, and nearby a painting dated 1952, which clearly shows that he used some kind of signs into his paintings.
Françoise. Yeah, but please. So I'm very happy to, of course, welcome Francoise Marquet Zao.
And slowly but slowly, he decided not to use any more signs, because he changed the sign to Chinese signs that became shortly some kind of patterns. And it was for him the way to go inside of abstraction. And here you've got two paintings, one 1954, one 1956, that can show you the differences in a very short time. On the left side, you could still see some Chinese characters. On the right side, you could see that these characters are more close to color patterns and something more abstract, because he was, in a way, finding his own way without any other references except what he had in mind. In 1957, he got divorced, and he decided to leave Paris for a while, and he decided to go to the US, to New York City, to see one of his brothers who settled in New York for a long time. There, he discovered some kind of new painting, the American abstract painting, and for him it was very impressive because it was a lot of freshness, big size canvases, and something very strong, very powerful, and a painting without any references. There is no boat, no horses, no figures, but only something abstract. And for him it was a deep, very deep influence. And he went to New York City with his friend Pierre Soulages. They traveled all over America. They went to Hawaii, to Japan, and in early 1958, Zao Wou Ki settled alone in Hong Kong here, where he stayed for something like nearly half a year. He wanted to find something new, to find something fresh, he gave lessons here in Hong Kong, and he also met his second wife, and went back in Paris in '59, in early '59.
Yann, if I may ask you, because I think it's quite interesting to go back to that shift, which is really interesting in 1957 when he's going to the US. He's saying he's divorcing his wife. He's also, I think, and that's why I think it's very interesting for us to get the inner stories. He's divorcing also his gallery at the time. Stop me if I'm wrong or correct me and say actually the real story, but I think it's really good for people to hear that at the time, Galerie Pierre is a very important gallery.
Yes.
And they had a special relationship together with Zao. And the fact that he continued on a different road, a different journey with his own art, how he did that and what was the relationship and how he continued afterwards. I think it would be interesting for people to...
Yeah, you're right. Even if the divorce doesn't mean that he changed everything in his life, but wanted to becoming an abstract painter. His first dealer, Pierre Loeb, I think in a way didn't understand that new kind of painting, and it became difficult for him to sell or to find people interested in that kind of new painting. So little by little, Zao Wou Ki and Pierre Loeb decided to stop to collaborate because Pierre Loeb wanted him to stay a figurative painter, and Zao Wou Ki wanted to make something else. And at the same moment, he met and was very closer to Myriam Prévost, who was director of the Galerie de France. At that time, it was a quite powerful gallery in Paris, and especially because they were fighting for abstract art, and they were defending artists older than Zao Wou Ki, like Hans Hartung, like also Pierre Soulages, and they wanted Wou Ki to come in. So for him, it was finally some kind of moving at the same time. He divorced from his first wife. He traveled a lot just to see something different. Arriving in the US, thanks to Pierre Soulages, he met the American art dealer Samuel Coutts, with who he will work for something like 10 years. And this will bring him to be part of the artistic landscape in the US. This is why you could find a lot of Zao Wou Ki's painting at the Art Institute of Chicago, at the Guggenheim in New York City, at the Detroit Art Center, Detroit Art Institute in Detroit, and a lot of US museums, thanks to Sam Coutts. And when he arrived in Hong Kong in early '58, I think he was ready to create something different. For him, it was the first time he came back to a Chinese land, well, a land of Chinese tradition. And for him, I think it was also important to reconnect with that kind of feeling and of place. And for him, it was perhaps the good time to begin a new kind of paintings. And if you see the painting reproduced here, which dates from '64, so a long time after the journey in Hong Kong, you could see that thanks to the US travel, he decided to create very large scale paintings, more than 3 meters long, and that there is nothing in common with what he did before. There is no more Chinese signs. There is only space, only colors, patterns, and something very wild, something very strong. That is, in a way, the feeling he had in the US, but perhaps with his own tradition and his own feelings.
And would you say that these changes in his life also varied in the intensity to which capacity to create works? They did. Now you're doing the catalogue raisonné you did the first part of the catalogue raisonné. You're working now on the second part with Francoise. Would you say that it had an impact on the production, and eventually to which extent at the time?
It had, even because when he was traveling he couldn't paint. So you've got the years he traveled a lot, you won't find a lot of paintings. And after the US visit, he will spend a lot of time on creating large-scale paintings. So there is an influence in his way to create some more bigger works. And perhaps he was somehow more free to create a new style and to make something different. And this is what you can find in his painting. And on the next page, you could find examples of the late 60s, 68 and 69, where you could find that the space is completely different. You've got patterns, you've got something more fresh, and you have more space. The space is different. And this is also because at that time he had more connection with China, and at the beginning of the 1970s, for the first time he was allowed to come back to China. And then coming back to China, of course he could see his parents, well, his mother, that he hadn't seen since 1938, and he rediscovered the Chinese tradition, the Chinese landscapes, the Chinese ink also. And in the early 70s, he created a lot of India inks. And for him, it was some kind of rediscovering a tradition, but modernizing it also. You've got an example of an India ink of 1972 in comparison to a very big, large-scale painting of the same year, which is in memory of May, of his second wife. And you could see that the black patterns are completely connected with the India ink technique. So he wanted to find with oil what he could have with Chinese ink on paper. And you could see that the space is different. There is something more you could press differently in front of that painting. You could feel that the space and the way he uses the space is completely different, and this is due to the rediscovering of the Chinese ink technique.
Can you explain maybe why he waited the 70s to actually go back to ink? Why do you think it took so long? Or?
Because in a way, when he arrived in Paris, he officially stopped creating by India inks. In fact, he kept on, but in a very reduced way. He didn't want to be understood as a Chinese painter. He didn't want people just to imagine he could create Chinese landscapes with bamboos and so on, because French people could have expected that from a Chinese painter. And he wanted to be considered as a European painter. Well, perhaps not a European, but a painter and not a Chinese painter. And he avoided to use that kind of technique because of that. In the early 70s, May, his second wife, became clearly ill, and for him it was very difficult to keep on creating with oil painting, because when you create with oil, you need to have a long time to wait for the oil to be dry, and he couldn't find enough time to keep on with oil. So he decided to reuse and to recreate some works by India inks, because for him it was more, in a way, easy and more practical, more quick to make that kind of works. And rediscovering it, I think he felt like at home. This technique that he learned when he was a child with his grandfather was something deeply inside of him. And I think he discovered that he could use it not as a Chinese traditional technique, but in a more vivid and more modern way. And since then, he kept on every year to use some time to create India ink paintings. On the next page, you could see two big canvases, one of 1974 and the other one 1986. The first one, you could see some quite of very different use of space, because the emptiness is in the middle of the canvas, where in the 60s you will find the pattern in the middle of the canvas. Here you've got the void. And in a way, this is for him the rediscovery of the Chinese tradition and the Chinese void, where Westerners could find something empty and some kind of lack. For him, it is more deep, it is connected to the breath, and this is something that you want to put inside of his painting at that time. And this is also the influence of the ink technique. And on the opposite, the 86 painting, I don't know if for you it could be connected to Chinese landscape or Chinese ink, traditional ink, and for him it was very, in a way, to modernize the tradition and not to keep on making the same thing. In the 80s and 90s, he became more and more famous in the Asian world, and he had nothing more to prove, and he became more and more free, and he wanted to create some new things, not to keep on with old recipes. And you've got here one of his biggest India ink, sizing closely to 4 meters long, which is now at the Artisan Museum in Tokyo. And he was not afraid to fight with very large scale works, also because at that time he had a very large studio at the countryside close to Paris, where he could create large scale paintings. And in 1991, he devoted a triptych to Claude Monet because he wanted to pay some kind of tribute to Monet, to the Impressionist painters, and to pay tribute to a painter he respected a lot. And you could see in that very big painting the influence of Monet. You could find some patterns linked to the Normandy coast, where Monet went oftenly to paint, but also for the liquid way he painted in water lilies. And for him it was very important to pay tributes to the old master and the people that were very important for him. For the ultimate work, Zao Wou Ki became more and more free and more and more connected with nature. In that big triptych, which is an homage to his friend Jean-Paul Riopel, the Canadian painter, he took a picture and the image of a maple tree that Riopel gave him, and he wanted to create something in homage to Jean-Paul Riopel, who just died, and he wanted to create that kind of connection with a friend, just died, but also to the nature and to the tree that his friend gave him. And in a way, it's some kind of recreation of nature. Of course, you won't have the image of a tree, but for him, it's some kind of inspiration and the way it could be connected to nature. And at the end, we just find some very late works dating 2007, 8, and 9, showing that when he became very old, he was more connected to nature, which became a very deep inspiration for him. And in 2008, he decided to stop creating with oil. So the painting you've got on the upper right is one of his last painting, because in a way he didn't want anymore to keep on painting with oil. It was perhaps too tiring for him, and as he wanted to keep on creating huge scale paintings, he couldn't afford anymore to make it. So he just decided to quit and to stop making oils. He even decided not to go anymore in the studio, and he replaced that technique with watercolor and India ink. And he kept on with watercolor till nearly close to his death. And you've got one example with the red watercolor of one of his last creation dated 2009. And finally, if we just want to summarize very quickly his journey, Zao Wou Ki could be understood as a Chinese painter and as one of the big masters of the 20th century in China, but I think it could be just a way to see him. I think his more wide than that. He's perhaps one of the big master who, that's something very common nowadays, just to imagine people traveling and people going to Africa, to wherever you want. But at that time, it was perhaps one of the first to connected Chinese traditions, Europe, where he spent most of his life, but also America, with the example of abstract painting of the early 50s. And in a way, perhaps he succeeds to mix everything, the Chinese tradition that was his roots, the European art he discovered in France, and what he saw in the US, and perhaps just to create what he wanted when he was a kid, just to invent some kind of new art, and some new art perhaps a bit too much, but some kind of new journey in art, and to invent something that has never been done before. And that perhaps a way to understand Zao Wou Ki just with that different point of view. Not only the Chinese, not only the French or European, not only the American one, but the mix of all of them.
Towards this point, and I think coming back to the exhibition that we have organized recently, last year actually, the Eternal Return to China, I think it's quite interesting because it could seem like Zao, when he left China in 1948, would have become more and more Western. Mm-hmm. But when we see some of the watercolors, some of his works, there's a lot of Chinese elements actually that come back much more than, for example, in the 80s or that, and so there is a way he's going back somehow to his roots, and I wonder if you saw that also in his life. I know, for example, that at some point he put a lot of bamboos in the home. And so that, no, right? He decided to have a fish tank in the studio. So these are elements of, I think, a Chinese history or legacy or heritage. Did you feel that as well, like a way to search for that, for these roots?
Because perhaps you could. He was Chinese, of course. He was a Chinese man, and he has been raised with Chinese tradition. And that was something deep inside of him. It couldn't be somebody else. But in a way, it was to can I say that?
Searching? Or?
It couldn't only be that, because that's something he was fighting also against, because for him it was tradition, it was old tradition, it was the same recipe in art that you could find since the Ming Dynasty, and he wanted something different, something more, something outside of that. And what he discovered in Europe and the US, I think he never became a US painter. Perhaps he was a mix of European and, well, French and Chinese influences. But, of course, for him, I think China was deeper inside. Yeah. You're right with the bamboos, the fish ponds, the way he behaved in the life. I think it's that perhaps something that could explain how he connected with so many people in Paris, because he had not that kind of I can say that
arrogance.
Arrogance of that European people could have, and I think European people and his friends deeply have seen that he is a good guy, and he has inside that tradition of respect, and I think this is something very connected to China.
Yes.
Maybe
Yes, I think that.
Can speak about something like this.
Papa, tu veux te joindre à nous?
Can you speak 2 minutes?
Je te le mets là ou là?
Sit for 2 seconds. No, I can testify that everything that has been said was right. At the end of his life, he was very much willing both to show how much he learned throughout his journey in France, in Europe, going to the US, traveling everywhere, but at the same time, he was deeply Chinese. And his way of life was full of references to China. I mentioned the ponds, the fish, the bamboos, the trees. He was very much surrounded by a lot of signs evocating China, feeling that his conception of time, and I think that's very important for a painter, he was not a man following any kind of urgency. The only urgency was painting, completely dedicated to painting, and completely dedicated to take the necessary time to be able to master his art and to do what he thought he was due to do. Art was really for him a daily duty, something that belongs to him as a man. He was a painter, he was an artist. And every time I was meeting him in different occasions during the day, in vacations or in Paris, his first word was when I asked, "How are you?" And he said, "Very well, I'm working." And he was keeping on every day through the idea that he should paint and work. And as very rightly Yann said, when he could not get any more the force to do some oil paintings, then he went through the watercolors and watercolors done on the motif. He was painting outside to really catch the reality of what he was looking. So he was in some ways doing some kind of an immersive experience, surrounded by nature and completely immersed on nature. But Arthur was mentioning the exhibition that he made in the gallery, The Eternal Return to China. I think that's one of the very strong originality of Zao Wou Ki. We should remind the fact that he is one of the very few, and maybe the only, painter of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st century, that has the legitimacy on the three major places of art creation. He, of course, is Chinese, so legitimate in Asia. He has been doing most of his life in Europe, and he has been working also in the US. So he went through the three major places of art. So he's a very universal painter concerning his influences, his mind, his references. But during all his life, he's been searching to understand better his own culture. His main dedication was to be the most possible a Chinese painter. When he arrived in France, he said on various occasions that through Cézanne, for example, he became a Chinese painter. He understood his own culture through the mediation of European artists, like Cézanne, or through Paul Klee, or through Henri Michaud. So you see, it's very important to understand that one does not catch the reality of its own culture just by staying in the place where one is born, or just by having a dialogue with its own culture. But it is going through the culture of others that you get to understand the reality and the originality and the strengths of your own culture. And that explains why all his life he's been looking around to different type of painting, different type of painters, different landscapes, to better be a Chinese painter correlated with the Chinese tradition of the Tang, the Song, and all the dynasties. And at the end of his life, what is very interesting is that it is true that China that's the part on his work where China's reference is the strongest. One of his last paintings, for example, is the Han Temple, Temple of the Han. And through this painting, you can see that the whole architecture, the whole composition of the painting is completely nurtured by Chinese culture. But to make this painting, It took all his life and all the previous painting to be able to do this painting. So it is not something that it is given. It is something that he caught, that's something that he conquered. And he has been able to do that because of all the other experiences and all the other travels and different type of cultures that he went through.
Thank you. I will just give again now the words to Yann to explain a bit more about the foundation, and also to thank Francoise, to whom has the initiative of this foundation. You should know that artists don't have foundations on itself, because it's not a due. Some artists don't have foundation, some they do, and they are financed privately. So we are very thankful to have someone who is preserving the image, the legacy of Zao Wou Ki, and financing, because it's personal money, to make sure that Zao Wou Ki is well understood, and I'm sure that Yann will explain now the missions and objectives of this foundation. But it's very important, because it is also a way for all the collectors of Zao Wou Ki to be protected somehow, and to make sure that the works that they have will be maintained in its legacy around the world. So thank you, Francoise.
Yeah. What the last pages you could find on the file will explain you the main missions of the Zao Wou Ki Foundation, which has been created in 2011 when Zao Wou Ki was still alive. And when the foundation has been created, it has been decided not to endow the foundation with any work. So the foundation does not own any works, which makes some kind of special case. Most of the artist foundations that we can know have works and collections. We don't, because we have been creating as in order to help to promote, to keep on speaking about Zao Wou Ki, but without having the works, and to give us the opportunity to be outside of the market and not to be involved in the market. So Francoise is the president of the foundation, and the foundation is settled in Switzerland. One of the first missions of the foundation is to manage the archives. Zao Wou Ki kept during all his life an amazing number of archives on his work, which could be a picture of the works, which could be clippings and newspapers, exhibition catalogs, and so on. And we are lucky enough to have all the archives just to be able to work on his works. And you will find on the next page, one example of the clippings of the newspaper that he made. So every time something has been written about him, he kept it just as an archive. And to be honest, it's not so common for artists at that time to have the idea of keeping everything and to manage to create that kind of archives. Due to what he left us, it is very important for us to keep on researching and to keep on finding information. You will find a painting and a reverse of the painting, because that painting has been oftenly called Hommage to Delacroix, who was a 19th century painter. And in fact, Zao Wou Ki never created that as homage à Delacroix. When some European people have seen that painting, for them it was linked to Delacroix. But in fact, if you have a close look, it is more linked to the immortal Han figures. And when you see at the back, he only wrote in French cavalier, which means horseman. So without the reverse, we won't have been able to give the right title of the painting. And this is very important for us to find that kind of information and to go directly to what he left at the back of the painting or in the archives, which give us the opportunity and mission to create and edit the catalogue raisonné of the painting. So the catalogue raisonné is the recollection of all the paintings that Zao Wou Ki created and to put them in order of its creation. And this is why we have to bother a lot of museums, private collectors, gallery, to have all the information we could find on the paintings to retrace the history of the paintings, but also check the size, the titles, the technique, and obtain good picture of the work to be able to reproduce this nicely and give the opportunity for researchers to have access to a compilation of scientific informations. So the first part of the catalogue raisonné has been published some years ago, and we are about to publish the second part of the catalogue raisonné at the end of the year. One of the missions of the foundation is also to check that everything is in order with the works attributed to Zao Wou Ki. So we can issuing certificates for Zao Wou Ki's works, which can be done for private collectors, but also for auction houses or any people who could have a painting by Zao Wou Ki. And it is very important for us to give the opportunity to collectors to have right information and to clean the market and to be sure that the works attributed to Zao Wou Ki are a real painting by Zao Wou Ki. That is why one of our missions is also to fight against counterfeiting, which is a deep and strong work, but we succeed to destroy fake works when we can find them. And this is very important for us to prevent these fakes, because there are some fakes, to reach the market. And it is one of our missions to clean and to be sure that when you buy a painting by Zao Wou Ki, this is a real one and not a copy. Of course, we also are here to make books on Zao Wou Ki, to collaborate to any publication and edition on Zao Wou Ki, which could be monographic book, but also exhibition catalogs. We've got two examples here of recent exhibition in the US and in Paris. We also are here to curate or to help and collaborate with museums to make exhibition on Zao Wou Ki, which has been the case in the Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris in 2011, or in another French exhibition in Hôtel de Caumont in Aix-en-Provence 2 years ago. We're here to help the curators to find the works, to make projects, and to build something on Zao Wou Ki to keep on explaining his works. Even if the foundation does not own any works, we are also here to accompany and guide Francoise, who is in charge of his own collection, and to organize donation to public museums. And as Zao Wou Ki gave her the mission, he wanted his own collection of paintings collected, made by exchange with his friends, to be given to a museum. And in 2016, Francoise decided to give the whole collection to a French museum. So you've got just two examples of one John Mitchell painting and one Hans Hartung ink and acrylic. And for her, it's very important to keep on what Zao Wou Ki had in mind and to give the opportunity of its collection not to be divided, but possibly shown in a museum, and then it could be borrowed by other people. On the same time, she gave the Chinese collection of bronzes that belonged to Zao Wou Ki to the Cernocchi Museum in Paris. And when there were some very nice and important projects, she could also decide to give works to museums, as it was for the homage to Matisse and India Ink at the Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris in 2018. On peut pas le dire tout de suite. And this is why we also work on a collaboration project with a lot of museums in Europe, in the US, in Asia, and that's also why we are here for you, for Art Fair exhibition, but also to develop projects as for the M+, and to try to organize things with that kind of very high-level museums to keep on speaking and exhibiting the works of Zao Wou Ki. And the last page is just Francoise and Wou Ki when there was the opening in the new Suzhou Museum in China that has been created by a very deep and close friend to Wou Ki, Yann Hendgen, which will shortly have an exhibition of the M+, and a picture of the two friends, Yann Hendgen and Zao Wou Ki, because in a way there could be examples of people coming from China going abroad and making something new and reviving the Chinese tradition.
Thank you very much.
The last.
Thank you, Yann. I would not likely to finish without asking the audience if they have any questions. I know that some of you have Zao Wou Ki works in their collection. If you even want to ask about your work or any other questions, you're welcome to, of course, have the specialist here on Zao Wou Ki. So, if any period or if no questions, then thank you so much. Okay. Yeah, of course.
So thank you, Arthur. Thank you, Prime Minister and Mrs. Francoise. And I'm really curious. We know Zao Wou Ki as a great artist, but in real life, from a wife's eyes, what kind of husband he is now?
Very quickly, madam. Because I answer very quickly. Because my English is very bad, and also is in private life. But I can say that my husband is interested by one thing, to paint. Painting. Sometimes to play tennis, but his unique problem is to paint. Nothing more.
Focus.
Just an anecdote.
Anecdote.
An anecdote. I love elephant. Elephant. Yes.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay.
And I say always to my husband, I want to traveling to Kenya to Botswana to see elephant. And my husband always say, I'm not interested by elephant. I want to paint. And Yann can
Confirm.
Testify.
Confirm.
Testify.
Voilà, nothing more, please.
Thank you for sharing it. Thank you very much.
And maybe Yann, your experience working with him as a man in every day.
He was devoted to paint from the early morning till the end of the day, and perhaps he was a very kind and a very nice person. I never heard any bad words from him to a painter or to somebody he didn't like. He just didn't mention it. But I heard him oftenly saying good things on people. And just one example, he oftenly told me, the very good French painter now, it is Pierre Soulages.
Yeah.
He couldn't imagine about himself. And he would just mention the master in France, it is Pierre Soulages. Okay.
Okay, another anecdote to laughing. When I see my husband ask me something, I'm saying, no, I don't want that. And he answers always the same. In Chinese, this word don't exist.
That's so true.
Okay, correct. What can I do?
Thank you so much.
Nothing else.
Yes.
So we have a collector friend, Margaret. She always have lots of questions on Wou Ki. So Margaret, you want to?
Please, Margaret.
I actually want to ask about colors, because you can see his colors of each painting for each period of time. It changes from sometimes from the beginning you can see the colors are very how do I say, like not very vibrant, and then until the 60s the color changes to very strong vibrant color, and then to the 80s and 90s, a very dreamy color. Does the color related to his mood every day, or like what does the color mean to him?
He often said that which in a way I don't believe, but he always said that he has no preference in color. Well, when you see the works, you could see that some colors he liked very much. The blue, the red. And we could imagine that for a Chinese painter, or well, a Chinese-based painter, it could be difficult to use yellow because it was the emperor color, or it could be difficult to use the white because it is for funerals. And he used that kind of color because for him each color has not a sense, it doesn't mean something, but it brings something. It brings the confrontation of colors. You could have two different colors. It could be, I don't know, red and blue or green and blue. It won't say the same. It won't bring the same meaning inside of the construction of the painting. And he was more involved in confrontation and creating the painting with the colors than to use only the blue or only the green. But where you, because it's difficult, I don't want to give the idea that you could read his life inside of his paintings, but she won't be happy. In a sense, you're true. When you see, when May, his second wife, was clearly ill, you will have a lot of brown, dark, red, something very strong, something very intense and very sad and fighting, because he wasn't happy, he was sad, he was fearing. You could find that because he put his inside into the emotion into the paintings. And in a way, sorry, but in the 80s, when he married Francoise, you will not find any kind of that paintings. It will be something, in a way, softer, with different kind of colors. You will find some pink, some blue, some something more, how could I say that? Something more quiet. Not quiet. Apaisé.
Yeah. Like harmony. Like
more harmony, yes.
More harmony.
So perhaps your harmony.
You say only, because I add something for the color you prefer. You say, I don't prefer one color. I'm interested by the
combination.
The combination between colors. The harmony and the combination.
But if you remember the homage to Francoise that we brought here, the homage, the triptych.
The red.
Red.
Which in a way could be understood with the Chinese tradition. This one. Oops, sorry.
Yeah, the old this painting. Well, any more other questions? Mr. Chan.
So where is the best period for Zhao's painting? Which period do you think is the best?
The one you like the most?
The end.
For me, it's the last one.
The last one.
The one you bought.
Yes, because it's a typically painting blue, but also the mountain, and mountain in China.
Yeah.
Yes.
All the history of China, China painting is with a mountain. I think it's.
That's why I like the painting.
That's why you're a happy man.
It return to China, like Monsieur De Villepin, right?
Yeah. But the painting is very good, the red one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, really yes. And would you see
Madame, what do you think? Do you prefer some painting with the color?
for the 60s? No?
I actually, to be honest, I like his later stage.
Now, yeah.
The color, it's more dreamy, and it's, I feel like more harmony. And then the 60s are very strong, very abstract, but it really depends because a lot of them are like quite similar but different color and different strikes. So I like them both, but for myself, I like the 80s.
To live with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would you say the void is something that we also is, I would say the void or the brushstrokes is part of the more of the, not the mood, but the what he wants to express as well. Because I'm thinking of a painting like Jacques Lacan that we all saw, the green painting in the last exhibition. I think the void is very expressive in that moment towards the idea of spirits, the time to pass by, like this moment where we need some kind of serenity.
Perhaps more, but you're right. In the 60s, there is some fight, there is a strike, there is a lot of strong things. Also because he went to America, where you could mainly find male painting, and for the abstract painting, it's something strong, something you have to prove something, and in a way, it was for me, it was less abstract in the 60s than what he was at the end of his life. And because in the 60s, the painting there is a lot of fire, there is a lot of composition, there is a lot of structure. And in the 80s, 90s, and at the end, you've got something more free, more wide, more, for me, in a way, more abstract.
Which one is your favorite period?
It changed. Before it was the 60s.
Why is that?
Large canvases of the 60s, because you can enter it. The Hommage à Varese, now in Lausanne, you can be surrounded by the painting. You can be surrounded. You can nearly hear sounds, or you can feel the wind. But now I'm more connected to the 90s. So it could change. Yeah. And in a way, it can show you that it is very different. 50s, 60s, 70s, and so on. There is some comparison you can make. There is something in common, but in a way, every time it is a new one.
On that note, thank you so much,
Thank you.
Yann, and thank you for.
And thank you to Tom.
Yeah, yes.